This episode is about the history of Parliament House in Perth. So why am I standing outside His Majesty's Theatre in Perth? Well, they are both fine examples of Edwardian architecture, and both Parliament House and His Majesty's Theatre were opened in the same year, 1904. But the real link is not Edward VII or even 1904, but gold. The discovery of gold in Coolgardie and Kalgoorlie in the 1890s brought prosperity to the struggling colony of Western Australia for the first time, and the colony had to catch up. And now they had the money. In 1890, when the colony was granted self-government, the counted population was about 40,000. 10 years later, in 1900, it was approaching 200,000. Now that is a boom. The colony of Western Australia was now ready to throw off the label of Cinderella colony that had been bestowed upon it by those people over east, the t'othersiders, that the people from the west referred to those from the east. So, what is the best way to show off your newfound wealth and confidence? Build things, of course, like a mint. With self-government in 1890, Western Australia now had a proper Westminster Parliament with two houses. The plan was now to locate them together on the one site, but where and at what cost? Even today, the suggestion to put money aside to be spent on Parliament and politicians is a sure way of provoking a ferocious debate. Not only was the building of a new Parliament being considered, but also a pipeline to take water to the eastern goldfields, where nearly 1/3 of Western Australian residents lived. Fremantle Harbour had to be upgraded to accommodate big ships, more railways and roads were needed, and money had to be set aside to join the other colonies in a federation. But the arguments for and against that taking place were just as ferocious. So a special commission was set up to recommend a new site for Parliament House, and the recommended site was on St George's Terrace, where the Legislative Council building stood, right here where I'm standing now. That is a mosquito-infested swamp, was one response to that suggestion. The Premier Sir John Forrest also held that opinion and was pushing for the site behind the pensioner barracks at the top of St George's Terrace to be considered. Forrest believed that the new Parliament should have a sweeping view over the city and South Perth. Was he intending to demolish the convict-built barracks to gain that view and rid us of a reminder of the stain of our convict past? It was an argument that would return to haunt a Western Australian government over 60 years later. Sir John Forrest knew exactly what sort of Parliament he wanted for Western Australia. Here is a quote from Sir John. "I believe in making a country's Houses of Parliament as convenient, as beautiful, and even as splendid as possible, so that those who enter them may regard them as something like sacred ground and be impressed with a certain amount of reverence for their surroundings and so behave themselves." So, the new Parliament was intended to be a grand statement, hopefully banishing forever the Cinderella snub. Others, however, including the Speaker, Sir James Lestier, were against spending big amounts of money and wanted the present legislative buildings added to and improved. Forrest was very unpopular with many, even in his own government, because of his support for federation. He was accused of being a turncoat on the issue and survived many motions of no confidence, the last only just. He quickly put into motion the recommendations of the Select Committee, and the amount of £25,000 was quoted as the starting price to build a new parliamentary building. The amount was, of course, woefully inadequate. The argument was to get the chambers built first, and the rest will follow later. That later turned out to be 60 years later. Of course, the later addition to Parliament House in Perth, where I am standing now, looks nothing like the grand plans that Sir John would have seen. Architectural fashion had completely changed by the time the Western Australian government of the 1950s gave the go-ahead for the building of this eastern wing that was opened in 1964. Building the Parliament became a high priority, but it could have easily come to a complete halt. The final decision to go ahead with building the Parliament in 1900 was made in the dying days of the Forrest government, and between then and the laying of the foundation stone in July 1902, there were 6 governments in Western Australia. Remarkably, this unprecedented period of political upheaval failed to slow or impede the project. Perhaps the Joint Advisory Committee set up to steer the project took advantage of the political instability of the time. Queen Victoria's death, the assassination of the US President and the Boer War dominated world news in 1901. But in Western Australia, the gold rush and the impact it was having on every aspect of life here dominated our world. Back to the building of the Parliament. The decision had been made to build, and now they needed a design. A prize was offered for the winning design with the condition that the estimated cost of the building not exceed £100,000. This restriction was to have a profound effect on the building project because it could not be completed in its entirety for that amount. Even the library, where we are now, was a last-minute addition.
For a lot of its life, from 2004 to I think 1912, it had been the library. The library then had to accommodate the billiard room here. So then the library occupied 2/3 of the space and the billiard room 1/3 of the space, as I understand. And then when the new city facade was put on in 1964, finished in 64, the library was moved. And this space was divided by floor to ceiling walls. One area remained the billiard room. One area was a television room. And one area was really operated as a committee room, and another area was divided off into individual carrels for members and ministers. It was just a dog's breakfast, and my opinion was that it should be restored to its original state, and if it was restored to its original state of one room, there was only one appropriate occupant. That was the original occupant, the Parliamentary Library.
Politics is the art of compromise, it has often been said, and this was very evident in the eventual cost of the original 1904 Parliament building. This is the completed western facade. No prize was ever given for the winning design because it was deemed to not have met the condition of being within the cost restriction of under £100,000. This was the design they settled upon, but it was never built. So the contract was given to the Public Works Department, which was then situated in the barracks. One of the chief architects was John Harry Granger, better known today for being the father to the celebrated composer Percy Granger. £16,000 was allocated when the contract was signed in May 1902. But now for something new, cost blowouts. By 1903, the revised cost to complete this first stage of the building had risen to £35,000 and to £140,000 if the building was to be completed with both an eastern and western facade. The compromise was to delay the completion of the eastern facade, and that compromise would last until 1964 when the Parliament finally got a front door. However, the new Parliament buildings opened to great fanfare on the 28th of July 1904. The Governor, His Excellency Sir Arthur Lawley, opened the new building, but it was quite obvious from the very beginning that it was cramped and incomplete. Staff had to work in temporary accommodation that was hot in summer and really cold in winter. Even today, there can be up to 3 members of Parliament in one small office. The Parliament needed to be completed. One event might have focused the need to put a completed front on the building, and that was the visit of Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness Prince Philip to the Parliament in 1954. This is where the royal couple entered the building. Queen Elizabeth II was the first reigning monarch to visit Australia, and the visit was received with rapture all across Australia. But when the Queen visited the Western Australian Parliament in 1954, she had to arrive through the tradesman's entrance from Harvest Terrace, and the embarrassment that some felt was thought to have spurred the decision to put a completed eastern facade on the building, and so give it a front door. Construction got underway, and in 1964, the Governor, Sir Douglas Kendrew, opened the new eastern wing. Since then, additions have been made to the northern and southern wings of the building to house the ever-growing staff in this rapidly growing state. But now, the original part of the building is over 110 years old, and the newer addition is over 50 years old. They both need a lot of expensive maintenance. Rob Hunter is in charge of making the decisions about maintenance.
We pretty much spend all our non-sitting periods, so if you look at that, that's probably just over half the year is spent fixing, repairing and maintaining the building. So Parliament gets an appropriation which is only $1 million a year for capital works. So when you look at a building that's 110 years plus old, even though there's different segments of it, there's a huge amount of maintenance that goes into that and repair. So when we look at our capital budget, we have to prioritise it based on the most urgent needs, but we also keep the sort of public-facing areas, the ones that the people get to see the most, in the best order. So beyond some of those corridors that they get to look into, there are some sort of dilapidated states of affairs with piping that's old, electrical wiring that's old, ceilings that are old. It's almost like a treasure hunt. Everything is heritage listed, of course, so it takes months and months of approvals and applications and architectural drawings, and then we will attempt to do something and discover that inside that particular wall there was cables that we didn't know. And I think for tradespeople particularly, they don't look forward to doing work at Parliament House because things like the ceiling voids are very, very tight, air conditioning, which wasn't even contemplated back in the 1900s. We've always been a bit of a hand-me-down organisation because governments of any day and any flavour are loath to give money to Parliament House because it's seen to feather their own nest, which makes it very difficult because it means we've got a very, very small budget with an enormous amount of work to do.
Parliament House is a beautiful building, and there are many plans for making it more accessible for the people of Western Australia and for visitors to the state. It just takes time, money and commitment. Easy to say, but very hard in practice. The first administrative building for the colony of the Swan River in 1829 was a tent on Garden Island. It has come a long way from there in nearly 190 years. And if it is to continue to look after the needs of the people of this fast-growing region in Australia, it will be fascinating to see what the Western Australian Parliament will look like in even the next 20 years.